Hi everyone, happy Monday. Welcome to Transformation Mondays, a series where we explore how to transform our workflows and our visuals using Adobe Creative tools. So if you're in the chat, say hello, let us know how your Monday is going. Let us know if it's, slow or it's full of energy, full of ideas. If you're preparing for Max, which is around the corner, it's kind of incredible. It's flown by. But the biggest creative conference of the year is starting very, very soon, in about a week. It's amazing. Let me know your excitement on the chat. I'm reading the Behance chat right now. We have Cody, we have Christian, we have Oliver, and Jeff. Hello from Eastern Pennsylvania. Wow, sounds spooky a little bit, right? So just me. All right, we have Oliver. Hey, what's up? What's it going? Okay, so let's see here. Today we're going to be exploring Adobe Lightroom. So more specifically, we're going to be exploring film in Adobe Lightroom. So I love giving myself a bit of a challenge whenever I'm exploring how to transform my workflow, especially my photography workflow, right? When we're editing photos, it can kind of start to become very much the same. You arrive at a style and you kind of get stuck there. So today we're going to be using film photos in order to get inspired. So I'm going to jump on here. We're going to start today with a little story. So here on my right-hand side, I have Adobe Lightroom. This is one of the images we're going to be editing. And here on my left-hand side, I want to grab your focus here. We have this fellow, wonderful photographer that I just ran into in New York City. It was one of those events where you just look at each other and you're like, hey, you're a photographer, I'm a photographer. Cool, let's talk. And that in itself sparked an incredible conversation about our common passion for photography. At the time I was carrying my digital camera. He had this incredible large format camera that at first I saw him and I was like, wait, does that work? And he's like, sure, it works. Can I take your photo? And I was like, of course, let's do this. I take one of you and you take one of me. So this is the photo I took of him, which was, inspired by his look. I asked him to stand against this beautiful brick wall and take this photo. And now I want to invite you to see the photo that he took of me. So I'm going to do a quick switcheroo of the camera and continue to say hi on the chat if you're just joining. We're going to be inspired by film today and jumping into Adobe Lightroom shortly. All right, so this is some of the photos that came out one time or another out of a film camera. Let's see. This is the photo that he took of me, which was so peculiar to see myself in this moment in, at the time, I think it was 2019, right, during the Brooklyn Photoville Festival. Really inspiring festival. And you can see there, what I want to focus on today is how we can examine photos of yesteryear and how we can find these little characteristics that really make it a film photo, right? So this one, for example, has a lot of green tint. You can see a lot of green all over the shadows in the entirety of the image. And of course, this image is a high contrasted image. He did that himself. That was purposely done, right? Finding this spotlight right there. But overall, this scene is very green tinted out of that large format image. Right, really cool. We have a few folks here on YouTube saying hello. We have Gala and Ryan. Hey. So then we have these other photos, which I'll share with you with the camera that I used to make these photos, right? So this beautiful photo came out of X70 Polaroid camera. And you can see that the film itself was a little bit old old, right? So a little bit aged. And so you can start to see these characteristics right here that we can begin to think, okay, well, that was an error. Let's see if I'm pointing at it. Well, that was an error. But when it comes to film photography, we're very forgiving. We're like, actually, that is a character. It adds character to our image. This image is a little bit more purple tinted, right? You can see that there. And you can see some of the variations in the lights that weren't exposed as much. And you can see from the same camera and the same film roll, a similar scenario with the film leak happening here on the edge and purple tints all across. Now this image right here, we're gonna jump into Lightroom shortly. This image right here I wanted to bring up because actually this is a really cool throwback. Me in the 90s, y'all. Super cool, right? You can see here the film photo has quite a lot of vignetting happening all around. But we didn't correct that. We kept that. And that is now what is characteristically a film-inspired nostalgic image, right? So how can we bring some of those details over into our post-editing workflow in Adobe Lightroom, right? Let's do another switcheroo here. Jeff is saying, it's crazy how we fix photos in post and now we want to go back and make our digitals look vintage again. I know it is, right? Maybe at some point we're gonna be doing the same thing, trying to emulate the look of a phone, right? That are very blue, I would say. Those images are always outputted very blue. The lights are always overexposed. But what's really interesting in this entire process is challenging yourself to observe those characteristics and being fairly aware of them and seeing which ones you want to pick, which ones you want to intentionally adapt into your workflow. So now looking into this image right here in Adobe Lightroom, this has already been processed, right? So this is my before. And this is my after. You can start to see here, there is some very peculiar scenarios happening. So this image was overexposed. I happen to have taken it, I believe, in only a JPEG at the time. So when things like that happen, I know there's not a lot of level of correction that I can do in post. So instead, I open my mind into the spaces of what if I can style it? Instead of correcting, I can style these color palettes that don't exist within my image, but can be an homage to another time, right? Some nostalgia here of film. So that is how I arrived at this image. Now, I'll let you examine that on its own, but we can see some of these images, this image already being inspired by some of these other photos that I have here. For example, in this one, you can see the light leak happening. This is an actual film photo that I captured with this camera, with this FTB, right? So some of these photos were captured by my wife. Some of these were captured by me. I'm pretty sure this one was captured by her. This one by me. You can still see that light leak happening, right? It's always a surprise. So I have here with me some photos that I took, some street photography that I took in Chicago, and you can see that these images somehow feel very different. They already, you can tell that they are taken with a digital camera. They don't have that element of film that is so hard to grasp. But here we are today, attempting to grasp it, attempting to dissect it, and find ways to do that in our post-editing in Adobe Lightroom. So I'll let y'all pick from some of these. We're gonna go here. We have one. We have fellow number 2. We have number 3. I'll give you those 3. Let me know which one you want to edit, right? Let me know in the chat. Oliver says, I'm looking forward to Virtual Max. Yeah, don't forget, you can also join Adobe Max virtually. I did that last year and it was incredible. I was listening to it. I was watching it. I just replaying it because there were just so many cool conferences that were also held online. So it's open for everyone, kind of amazing in that way. I love Poland pictures. They have something special in them. Polaroid pictures. Polaroid pictures. Yeah, they're really quite special. So that one particularly, the Polaroid images, I took with this camera, which is super fun. Such a fun camera to play with. Goes flat, right? And it gets bigger. I mean, the inventions that we've had in our lifetime and before us, right? So let's see. Back to our demo here. I think I'm going to test out this image. I love my composition here. I love the way that the circle is forcing your eye to travel, almost like a voyeuristic eye, to travel within each circle here. So we've categorized a few examples. We said the shadows were green, and we have that style, that kind of color palette going on, green or magenta, right? So let's try doing that. And this is how I would approach it. So within the adjustment panel here, we have under color, this section that I absolutely love. It's called color grading. So color grading is particularly a step that I often think about when I want to stylize an image. Not so much correct an image, but stylize it. You can use it whichever way, but in my headspace of my workflow, I often think, how can I add a little bit of effect to my image? And in this case is by affecting the midtones, the shadows, and the highlights, and adding a bit of color palette to those elements. So at the moment, if I was to look at my image, I can see it's fairly blue, right? The white balance was definitely focused on those very cool colors. But maybe I want something different. I want a different feel, and I'm going to use that image as an inspiration to use this one. Let's use this one right here, right? This Polaroid in purple, and add a bit of purple to my midtones or to my shadows. Actually, I'm going to do my shadows here. And you can see just by doing that, that entire image feels slightly different. Now, this one, I wanted to use purple because there's plenty of green that exists within the image. So you do want to think about an opposite color that can help balance the image. And talking about balancing, you're going to find this little lever here at the bottom. And that's going to help you balance between the furthermost dark area of those shadows and the lighter area of those shadows, right? You can see that difference happening there. I like going into the darker area personally because I like that contrast. But if I'm thinking about film, I might not get that much contrast in those scenarios. So I might have to lighten it a bit, right? You don't get that kind of strong contrast unless you're being very intentional with it. Under here, we also have the blending tools, which work very closely together, but this impacts all of your choices, your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights. So let's say we add a different color to our highlights. So oftentimes we will run into an image. The highlights in this image, for example, are not white. They're off-white. They're a bit yellowish, actually. So let's add that into our decision here in post-editing. Let's add that stylistic color, that yellow stylistic color. So now this image is no longer blue/green. It's kind of clearly visible what it used to be now that we see it edited, right? So this is how I love using my color grading panel, activating those shadows, those midtones, and those highlights to be able to add a color palette that may not have existed within my image to begin with, right? So I love that image already, and we're gonna go into another image here to try to explore different scenarios. So let's say we talked about vignetting, for example. Let's say I want to activate this image too with a bit of a film color palette. I might want to go then into my masking options, and I'll enter this radial gradient. And in radial gradient, you'll see an example here of how it functions. Let's see here. And we're gonna add a gradient. So now we have different ways to add a gradient. We have object, brush, linear gradients, one which we will use today, radial gradients. So I'll use a radial gradient today and just hold and drag. So you'll notice that there's a red area that now it's displayed. But in order to create my vignette in the way that I want to create it, kind of a free form style, there's definitely another way. I would want to then reverse this. So let's go into these three dots and invert gradient or Command I. So now you see that the gradient is being reflected on the outer area. Now I don't want it to be solely focused on him because in fact, my focus ended up on this person here walking behind him. So I might want to do something where it includes both of them, something like that, right? So we're helping the viewer navigate my image by adding this vignette is how it's what the focus is, right? So we're gonna go into that panel that now happens within our mask, and we're gonna start to change some of these properties. So let's change, for example, if we change the exposure, you can start to see how that starts to look, right? The opposite. But I like to be a bit more focused. So I'm gonna actually affect the highlights a little bit and maybe some of the shadows. And so those are the areas that will be affected, and then bring that down. And we can even choose to add a color to that scene. So we can choose to make that vignette a color palette. So it feels more purposeful, right? So now that vignette is traveling, that filter or that color palette is traveling as almost as a viewfinder. So the person's gonna immediately look at this person here and this person here and then this person here. So it's a good way to refocus the viewer's attention. And you can move forward from here, continue to edit this image, but that is one of the ways I would like to apply the vignette from film to digital. Okay, so let's continue to a different image. So one of the things that I noticed in film photography is that oftentimes there was a lot of exposure, like overexposure. So for example, this image that my wife took of me slacklining, you can see that there is a lot of overexposure here, right? That can happen quite frequently, and a lot of grain. You can see all that grain. So something that we would constitute as an error within our digital images, something that we want to perfect and move away from, can be something that you can embrace and choose to then explore within your images and bring them back, right? Especially images that you thought, oh man, I can't really correct this image because it's a JPEG. I can't go any further in correcting it. Why not embrace the error in itself and see how it plays a role in the storyline of photography, right? So that exposure often happens, and I notice it quite often. You see the exposures happening here at the top. So I want to embrace that exposure. Well, by the way, here's me falling off. Really fun. Great. So let's use this image right here and start to explore how that would look like. Okay, so this image already has that exposure happening. This is pretty early on in my street photography career. So there was a lot of moments where I would miss the moment. Maybe I had just exposed for a darker area of street photography, right? Maybe I was in the subway, or in a train. So that's where my exposure was. But then I saw this fella and I wanted to capture him. So in a matter of a second, I did not have the exact exposure needed for the background, but I did have a fairly good one for him. So what could have been constituted as a mistake, I'm just going to embrace it here in my post-editing workflow. So I'll first crop it so that it's a bit more balanced. I think right now it's too much of that building. I want it to be more focused on my subject. So let's see, maybe somewhere around there. Saruj says, really cool perspective in this shot. Oh, for sure, number one. Jeff, thanks for participating in that. And Gala says, I'm in France and it's pretty late here. Oh, that's awesome. I thank you for joining us from your nightly hour. I love editing my photos at night too. Okay, so let's see if we can explore our color grading in this area. So for example, we have a lot of highlight going on here. So what about if we tint that highlight so it's not so shocking to the eye, right? So in this case, we can't recover that highlight. This is a JPEG image. Another error that just hits my heart, right? But it's okay. We're gonna find new ways to correct them. This is why I selected this batch of photos. So I can choose to tint this background with a different hue. And that alone is gonna give it an element of film nostalgia that we're looking for, right? We can do that blue tint. What does blue give? What kind of emotion does blue give you if I add blue to this image? What kind of emotion does green give you if I add that green tint to this image? It makes you want to build the storyline even further. I think I have to align this a little bit better here. It makes you want to like question more. Whereas if we just see this image like this, maybe it just looks like a digital image from today, right? There's a lot of story building that we've seen on TV, in movies that are often filmed with film cameras. So we have that conditioning in us. So it's pretty cool to then adapt it into our post-editing workflow to see how we can transform our images, right? So I like how that looks. That green is giving me a lot of that very cinematic film vibe. For lack of a better term, I cannot describe these things. Some of these things are very abstract, right, in nature. So it might give you a different feeling. Like for me, maybe he is in this grand city, right? This is Chicago. You can see it here in the sign, Chicago, ESPN, right? And so we might want to embrace that. And I love that already. I think that's looking super cool. And that's just affecting the midtones and affecting the highlights. So what would happen if then we affect the shadows with a different color palette? So far we have midtones in orange, we have our highlights in green, and let's see how we can affect our shadows. So we can do something like this. Do a little bit of a purple tint. Wow, that's already looking like a mixture of, let's see, a mixture of this one and this one put together, right? What else can we bring from these two photos? It's a mishmash of these two images. So you can see there how closely together those color palettes begin to form. Jeff says, if it weren't for the car in the shot, you can probably turn this into an older photo, maybe from the 80s, right? It's already giving you that kind of 80s energy. Really, really interesting. So if I wanted to go a step further here, I can go into my effects and begin to dehaze some of this photo, right? So there's a certain element that happens in film photography. There's a certain element that happens in film photography where you can see that the image is not crisp. That is an evolution of digital photography, right? We wanted more pixels and we got them, right? But these images don't necessarily tend to look like that. So if we're examining how they used to look, I think making them less crisp would be definitely a factor in emulating that effect. So I'm dehazing here under effects. We're gonna find dehaze. Dehaze is commonly used for weddings too, to soften the skin, make it look ethereal. So this kind of has that element there too. So we can build on this image, continue here and go into our effects panel and find that other area where we can find the vignette. So I can add a vignette to this image, right? Like this. or the opposite. You can be subtle. It's also important to recognize that restraint matters. I can go really crazy with this image, but at some point you have to step back. I love hitting the letter F to just see the full image and step away and see how far I've come. If I liked something about the original image that I want to keep, maybe I love the blue hat a little bit too much, maybe I want to bring it back, or I'm doing good. This is working out for me, right? So hit that letter F to go back. And actually, one of my favorite things is to go into this little clock right here and go for this plus sign and create a version and call it green purple. Green purple. So that is one example that we can strive for. And if we continue to edit this image and we continue to change it, then we can create yet another version and adapt our workflow that way so that we know, okay, maybe I like the first version, the green purple version most. But at least this way, you're allowing yourself to continue to experiment. Awesome. Okay, so let's continue here. If I love this edit, for example, I might want to go in here and find a way to save it for future use, right? So let's go to this plus sign and create a preset. And you can see all of the different effects that we just created. The profile, the light, the color, the effects, the details, the optics. Okay, so we didn't really do anything to the details of the objects. We can uncheck that. The light, colors, all the rest is fine. So let's call it green, purple for now, unless the chat gives me a cooler name than green purple. And let's hit save. Let me know what we should name this filter, and I'll show you a place where you can find it. So, okay, let's go into Sin Lagos, which is a folder I've created in order to save all my presets, and you should be able to see all my presets in here. Really, really fun stuff, right? So I'm gonna go into green purple right here, and that is my filter. And you can see on the right hand side, it activates all of those properties that we had changed. So if I was to go into this fella right here and add green purple, then we get that green purple effect. Let's straighten this image in here. Really different, right? If we add it to this one, we can go in here and find green purple. Now, let's say, for example, I like that green purple on this one. I'll save it as 1, but I actually want to continue experimenting. So I'm going to go back to my original. My green purple is still here, and I'm going to play with this image. So I'm going to show you another way that I love exploring, especially landscapes, right? So let's go into our color once again and start changing the temperature of this image, right? So I'll change it over to yellow because naturally most of the time my photo comes in pretty blue. So very literally and figuratively, it comes in very blue because of the way I expose my white balance. So oftentimes I have to push this lever over to the yellow side. And I like doing this a little bit further if I'm really intentionally trying to style my image. So I'm going to go into this color here and try to localize that green that is within the lake in Chicago and bring that down a little bit so that we're going to bring down the luminance of that scene. Right? You can see how it detects that color palette. This is how it used to look. This is how it looks now. And I think there's something missing here. Everything's starting to get too caught up in the green yellow hue, right? So if we look at a color wheel, it often looks like the green and the yellow are right beside each other. So what can we do about that? We can add an opposing color in some of these areas here that are pretty much black, right? So we're going to go into our shadows and add maybe a blue hue or a purple hue. So the opposing end of the color wheel essentially. And that starts to feel a little bit different. There's something really cool about seeing how the voyeur right here is being framed by a voyeuristic frame by the photographer, right? i.e. me. So you can see how cool that can play out when you just finding the opposite color palettes that you already know exist within film, but you can start to include them all, not just one, but all of them within here. So we have the green, we have yellow, we have purple, slightly purple blue shadows within this image. So then now that I've done this edit, I can add another version, create a version here and call it number 2. Jeff says vintage cool as a filter name. Oh, I like that. Vintage cool. Let's call this one vintage cool. So let's create that preset right here. Add a plus, and let's call it vintage cool. And in fact, I'm going to add one last thing to this image, which is these references of light leaks that we've been seeing here, right? You see this light leak happening quite straight on. It's almost like it was too overexposed, and it's really interesting how it meshes together within the image. You can also see it in this one. There's a lot of exposure happening. So light leaks don't always come with color. Sometimes it's just overexposure. And we're gonna imitate that with this image here. So we're gonna go into our masking tools. We're gonna go into our masking tools, and I'm gonna select the linear gradient this time. Instead of using the radial gradient, we'll choose the linear gradient. So we can use the linear gradient up here, and we can choose to do one of two things. We can add color, or we can overexpose it. So let's expose to see what that would look like. So that would be a characteristic that will give the viewer this intuition that it's potentially a film image, but potentially not, right? Like, when was it taken? Do I feel a historical element to this image? And it's not a matter of deceit, it's more of a matter of inserting nostalgia and elements that you know are have been loved for so many years, right? Like, we've loved these photos for so long. We try to learn more about them, and it's a beautiful homage to them, in my opinion. So I can do that exposure there, or I can rotate this and create that exposure to the right. Now, again, it isn't meant to look correct. We have to astray from that mindset. We're not doing this post-editing workflow to correct our image, to make it the best pixels, to remove grain, to remove overexposures. We're actually embracing these imperfections. We're doing the complete opposite. So I definitely encourage you to try that, because we can get caught up in what makes a photo perfect, and oh, well maybe this photo is not perfect, so I'll never show it off, I'll never print it, I'll never hang it on my wall. But maybe all you needed it was to embrace those imperfections, right? So in this instance, I'm adding an imperfection, I'm adding that overexposure. So in this case, I'm going to leave it as an overexposure here on the left-hand side. So you can see what that looked like before and what it looks like now. Cody says, I'm loving the light leak. Yeah, it looks really cool, right? I've been using it quite often. Awesome. So I love this light leak. I often find myself experimenting with different ways to introduce even a little bit of a sliver, just to give it that sense of analog that is so beautiful and we just absolutely love, right? So say, for example, I want to bring that into a different image here. So I have these really wonderful images that I took in Japan. So we're going to go to a whole nother place here. I took these gorgeous images in Japan, and they're flat on purpose. So I'm definitely going to be inserting color here to bring them into this like world of film, and also to just like insert that kind of energy back into these images. So this image think I took it with a Leica. Yeah, I took this image with a Leica. It says October 2023. I did not have that timing right. So I'm going to go in here and definitely bring back some of the colors within this image. So I can see there's a bit of red happening here. I'm going to use the target adjustment tool to bring in that red. Make sure it's in hue. Well, let's make sure it's in saturation first to bring in that red a little bit higher. And then let's go to hue to determine what hue of red we want to create. Increase that luminance too, so it comes up. You can see it being exposed there. Let's increase that saturation. You can see the sky is almost absolutely white. So we're going to add some flare to that to give it a little bit more color, more boost. So we'll add more saturation to all these colors. And you notice I didn't have to switch the colors right here in my selection. I'm just targeting colors independently as I go. It's a really easy workflow to adapt to because you're just selecting an area in your image. So already it goes from that to this. So it's just that slight change that looks much better, right? So let's go into our highlights and expose that sky with a different color palette. We can do blue. That looks a lot like I just shot this image on an iPhone. One day we're going to be emulating that potentially. Potentially not. We'll see. Right? So let's see if we can add a different color here. What looks best? Again, this image is not meant to feel perfect. It's meant to be embracing imperfections. So you can see by adding a little bit of blue into those highlights, I actually brought back some of that color contrast between the clouds and the sky, which is nice to know. And I'm intentionally bringing in images that are challenging to work with. So I'm going to bring up that mid-tone to differentiate the tourists or the passerbyers from the rest of the scene. We can choose to bring up those shadows. That's looking way better already. Jeff says, I agree, loving the light leaks. Definitely have to bring back those light leaks then. So I'm loving how that's looking. And I think one of the things I want to bring in here is go into my grain to add a bit of grain in here on purpose. I don't know if this is going to translate over, but hopefully it does. I can see it fairly well. I might have to overdo it so y'all can see it. Okay, something about grain just flattens out the image in such a cool way. I love the way that tends to give a different aspect to my images. So I'm going to add a bit of orange here to really accentuate those reds. And it's funny because I'm doing very slight changes, but once they get layered on top of each other, it really starts to make a difference from this image that looks partially gray to this more colorful, more energetic image. Right, so let's bring back that light leak over here on my shadows. So let's go into linear gradient, and maybe we bring it to this area right here. So I noticed that in some of these images, it was right on the corner. So let's see if this time, instead of just exposing it, what we'll do is we'll add a color. So let's add a color hue by turning this dial on. And we can select a color exclusive for this section. Let's see if it's coming through. We might have to move it from that area to somewhere else so it comes through. So I'm choosing blue there. Maybe we can do a bit of yellow. You can see the colors changing here and creating that contrast. I don't know if y'all can catch it. Let's see. See that? See those changes happening? Maybe I'll do a little bit of blue, intensify that color a little bit with the saturation. It's funny because this entire process can be very, very invested as you continue to layer different parts and add a different look to your image. So you can see there where it was affected. And we can, of course, stretch that color hue over completely. So this could be another way to add color where color doesn't exist, right? You notice how blank that area was. So this linear gradient is a great way to just target a color that wasn't even part of your image to begin with. But I definitely like it a little bit, just a hint there on our scene. So let's look at it in full view. This is what it looked like before. And this is what it looks like now. Super cool. So I think I'm going to add a new one here for this one. And I think I'm going to call it Japan Energy. So question from YouTube, are you doing each of these adjustments in separate layers? No, I'm not. The criteria of Lightroom, I would say, I'm saying layers mostly because I'm going step by step, and it is doing a global edit on most of my image, right? But it's not that it's exactly layers in the way that Photoshop works. You do have the opportunity, though, this is non-destructive. You do have the opportunity to revisit some of those edits. So for example, I'll give you a good example here. Let me see if, make sure my screen is a little bit brighter. Just in case we're seeing it a little darker, got darker in my house. Okay, so for example, if you were doing an edit or you had decided, okay, I like this, or I want to apply a filter to one of these images. I like this filter. Let's apply it to Chicago. It's a building as well. So maybe that could look really cool. I'm going to show you an example of how it's non-destructive, right? So let's do Japan Energy. Definitely like how that's looking. I think it's nice. I can definitely decide the amount, right? Decrease that amount. Let's say we leave it at default. Because this image was taken with a different camera, that filter interacts differently. So what's cool about it is that you still have opportunities to make edits because all of these edits are reflected within your properties panel. So you can see it all within all of these different layers, so to speak. So if I want to go into detail, for example, and remove some of that, I think it was in effects, there it is. If I want to go to effects and remove some of that grain, I can do that. I can say, you know what, this time I don't want any grain in my image. And I can still keep those other edits along the way, right? So maybe I want to atone how these midtones are falling into my image, right? This midtone hue that I chose. I can still make those edits. So that is super cool because you don't have to be stuck with a particular filter or a particular part of your workflow process. You can always revisit your image. And even if you don't like this image altogether, you can go to versions and find your original, right? I love being able to make up my mind later, especially when you've been batch editing and you find yourself just editing so many images at the same time. It can be, harder to discern, okay, actually this is a good edit. No, it's starting to look foggy at this point because I'm on my 70th image, right? So it's great to revisit it later and then still have that opportunity to make those edits. And Jeff is asking, is this Lightroom or Lightroom Classic? So that's a great question, Jeff. This is in fact Lightroom. So you're gonna find different tools within Lightroom that are unique to the Lightroom experience, but you can still find a lot of familiar elements within between Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. Some of my favorites for sure have to be like things like being able to make some of these color selections that I often do in Lightroom Classic as well. but definitely some organization elements I love in Classic. So hopefully some of those get adapted in the near future. We don't know. Maybe it's at Max. Who knows? We'll see, right? We'll have a chat about it on our way back. So I love this image. I love the way this is looking. And the last thing I want to be able to show you before we head out of here, which is, yes, we're doing good on time. Awesome. So I want to show you one last step here. I love being able to share my photos and my process within a community. So oftentimes I find myself either sharing it on my website or sharing it on, I'll go here. I'll show you on my website here, right? Or I'll find myself sharing it on Behance. So you'll see some of my images here. And these are the spaces that I have chosen as a photographer. You can see some of those film inspirations playing a role in these images as well. An Art Deco exploration of architecture. And you can see how those get adapted within those light conditions. So I welcome you to explore it in any photo series that you may have. You might get really surprising results. But I think it's always important to, now that you've edited your photos, step into how you share your photos, right? So I love being able to share them on spaces like Behance and my website, because it's just such a different level of interaction of a community that appreciates these things, that these processes that we undergo in order to get an image that we love, right? So these are super cool series that I feel like inspire and affect other people in our community to get going on their photos, those photos that we store because we think they're not perfect, but potentially they have so much potential within them, right? Right. What else can I say there? I often have found myself revisiting a lot of photos and giving them a new level of energy, a new breath, right? So I often share them on my website. Definitely find yourself exploring the different ways that you can share and promote the process of your work, because you never know who you're impacting. I often think of this. So another really, really special place that not a lot of people think about, but it's already coexisting within our Lightroom program, is this section right here. So if you go into the Discover panel, you're going to find this giant library of photos that were shared directly from Lightroom. So you can see how cool it is, how people are editing in real time. These are some photos that were edited within Lightroom, and you can see the before and after as I hover, which is so cool to see the process that people have. And you have this really neat option here to remix an image, right? So if we liked an image and we just want to maybe experiment or exercise our new skill today, you can choose to adapt this effect into one of the photos that you have here. So for example, if I want to go in here and I want to remix this image, I can do so, right? We can play around and then reshare it with artists. We can also just adapt it with one of our filters, right? We have purple sky, different filters like this, and reshare it. So you're probably asking yourself, well, I'm not gonna do this image at this moment, but you're probably asking yourself, well, how can I share, for example? So let's go to recent edits. I'm gonna go into this image, and I'm gonna go into this little button right here, which is for us to export. And we're gonna go down to share to discover. And this is the area where you can share directly to this Discover community. Cody says, can you share, from YouTube. Okay, can you share your presets between Lightroom and Lightroom Classic? Yes, I often done that. Actually, a lot of the presets that I have within Lightroom, I brought from my time in Lightroom Classic. Some of the filters that I absolutely love and I cannot separate myself from. What did we say? We were going to call it film, cool film. Cool film. So you can describe this image, film, nostalgia, and we can select the different subject matters, so it appears in different sections, different categories. So we can say documentary, travel. And then in this section here, we have permissions, enable, save as presets, include a location info, right? So if I want to include the location, this is Chicago, super cool. Other people can go and visit this landmark or go and retry something. Definitely open the world of possibilities. And then we have the section of enable, save as presets. So I definitely want to enable this as on so that everyone here on the chat can download this presets and try it on because we did it together, right? So let's allow remixing as well, so you can try out this image and find different ways to adapt your own aesthetic, your own style of film inspired photos. And so I'm going to turn that on as well, and we're going to hit share. So what this is going to do, it's going to submit my image to the entire library of the Discover panel within Lightroom. And it's going to allow you to see not only this image, but also all of the really cool images that I've created, right? You can, all of the cool images that you've created, you can start to create your own library here that you can share later with other folks. And you can see how, when you hover over them, you can definitely see the process of each image, right? How each image was edited. This one's still working, so let's see if it's ready. All right, it's ready, y'all. So I'm gonna copy this and share it on the chat. So you can see there that we can actually see the entirety of the process of this image. If you have layers and layers of editing, all of those are going to be reflected here. You can see our dehaze, you can see our vignetting at this point, and we have this button right here that says save as preset. So you can save this preset directly, right? Really cool. You can try it out and you'll have it in your libraries to try it on different images. You also have the section here called remix. So I definitely invite you to remix this image, find your own storyline, find your own inspired film. Maybe you can pick up some of the albums that you have hanging around and see what aspects you find within your image that you can bring on in your workflow and your process, right? And definitely give it a like and definitely support this image. I'm always going to be on here checking out the really amazing transformations that people make whenever they remix it. I have this image, for example, somebody remixed it into something like this, and I just love this. Like, it's just one of those things where you're just like, okay, I didn't think of this option. This isn't a step that I thought about. I love that somebody else stepped into this image and found their particular viewpoint of how to post edit it. So this person created a mask. We're able to see that, and they desaturated those scenes. So we're able to see the transformation that they took from an image that you initially captured. Let's see this one. I think this one has over 39 remixes. Yeah, this one has a bunch of remixes. So you can see another viable option. Look at this. Really cool. You can definitely see the person who took it, who remixed it here. So it's a wonderful option for you to see the potential of a different community that you can explore, so you can share your images. And hopefully it's the world goes round, right? You're able to see the different ways that your image can be edited in ways that maybe you didn't think about. So we don't get stuck in one way of styling our photos, because I don't think that's ever fun, right? The world is about, the world of photography is about experimentation. It has always been, right? Film wouldn't be in this world of digital if we hadn't been continuously experimented with the possibilities, the potential of this medium. So with that, y'all, I think I'm going to let you go. I hope you get a chance to experiment and try it out yourself. I absolutely love playing around in Lightroom and finding myself experimenting for hours. So I hope this inspired you to transform your workflow, and I'll see you on the other side.